Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for your kind introduction, and also thank you for your very interesting paper. I think there are many things which could be said in a similar fashion concerning Latvian modernist literature of the 1920s, and also texts which have been generated by those authors who started the literary works after 1906. There was a new generation in Latvian letters. In this paper, we'll move slightly backwards in time if compared to the time period you discussed. We'll talk about the turn of the 20th century in a quite general fashion, as you see here, and I also try to keep the story of the development quite simple, and I hope also quite understandable. We can make it more complex maybe in the discussion afterwards. So, and my talk will be actually divided more or less into three parts. I'll begin with an introductory part, and then the strategy will differ a little bit. I will not that much go into theoretical texts, but I'll focus on a couple of case studies, which probably will occupy about a half of my talk. Let's hope we survive that part. And then some conclusions come at the end. So let me begin with one of the most famous scenes of the 20th century Latvian literature, which you would argue is also among the most modest or trivial literary imagination can provide. It is a scene at the end of a five-act drama, where a young woman whose mind and soul are split by her passion for an attractive but unreliable young man on the one hand, and by the attempts of her relatives to marry her off to another and well-to-do suitor, finally turns to her beloved, summing up her feelings in just one sentence, quote, "All I can do is to love." Quite a trivial scene. You'll see that mise-en-scène, how it was represented during the 20th century, didn't change much. She tends to become younger in the production of the 21st century. But anyway, it's like a scene which you could expect to meet in many literary works. So we could ask a question: can such an ending, well suited for melodrama, point towards an early 20th century modernist work of art? And in this paper, it is my point that that is important, in the different temporality embodied by the, at that time, semi-peripheral Latvian culture. The scene in question is indeed both traditional and innovative, realist and modernist, modest and revolutionary. So I try to make it clear that I intend to approach the cultural and social milieu in Latvia at the turn of the 20th century by making use of methodology of post-colonial criticism, also pointing towards the so-called global turn in comparative literature and also in modernist studies. The editors of a recent volume on modernist literatures also pay tribute to these developments in their chosen title, the Oxford Handbook of Global Modernism. In her article, World Modernisms, World Literature and Comparativity, Susan Stanford Friedman asks the question, quote, "How has, or for that matter, how should modernist studies participate in the shift in literary studies towards the planetary?" It's yet another notion she puts. It's unquote. She distinguishes between two different models. A center-periphery model, which you also have on the slide, based in the world system theory, initiated, as you know, by Immanuel Wallerstein, and the circulation model based in cultural theories of traveling cultures, transnational cultural traffic, and cultural hybridity. We could name a number of theorists here, of course. My own approach in this paper is closer to the first of those models, which treats the relations of core periphery and semi-periphery, even if you don't like these, but they are still there, probably. As a joint power-regulated system which provides the conditions for the inequality of development within the same historical period. And we could argue, I will not go far in that direction in this paper, but we could argue that this pattern has from the late 15th century onwards also paved the way for the colonial matrix of power, colonizing, well, it's a cliche by now already, but still the idea is colonizing not only space but also time of different cultures, which is relevant in a sense for my paper. So I personally find works of Walter Mignolo very inspiring. And in his words, the master narrative of Western modernity has been supported by the ideology of either salvation, historically, or development, notion still topical in the 20th and 21st century. So if the idea is that social conditions have differed greatly around the globe, with societies moving at different speed, in different, but also maybe in one and the same time, experiencing ruptures and disjunctures in the process of development. My argument in this paper is based on an assumption that in the conditions of life characteristic to the turn of the 20th century Latvia, manifestations of modern literature might have been much more modest in terms of aesthetic radicalism, while at the same time still introducing, or at least pointing towards, modernist paradigm. One of the possible points of reference on the continental scale is Scandinavian modernism, which was also influential across the Baltic Sea, and similarly, at an early stage, was initiated by radical social involvements, and then stretching deep into the 20th century. Anna Westerståhl-Stenpert writes in a recent article that, I quote, "Modernism in Scandinavia emerges both early and late, through starts and stops in intermittent and localized forms, as well as in tension with ideologies of margin and center, import and export, and nation and cosmopolitanism." Unquote. One of the lines of thought critics have paid attention to was the motivating force of Georg Brandes' socially charged criticism, which inspired the rise of literature of the so-called modern breakthrough in Scandinavian countries from the 1870s onwards. So, possibly the seeming backwardness of development has contributed to the social radicalism of literature. A similar claim concerning the absence of involvement of writers in social issues has been strongly put forward in the late 19th century Latvia by literary critic Jānis Jansons-Brauns in his paper Thoughts on Contemporary Latvian Literature, published in the early 1890s. And if I make a detour, Scandinavians were already at a different point at that time if we remind us of Knut Hamsun's lectures, for example, taking place at exactly the same time. So Jansons was actually moving along with social lines still, and he sharply criticized what he found sentimental and out of date in Latvian letters. In our context, Jansons' influential voice was timely, and it is also indirectly echoed much later by Toromoy in the idea of an unbridgeable gap between idealism on the one hand and modernism on the other, as the most important tension in the 19th century literary development. It is a proposal in her book-length study on Henry Gibson, published 2006. And I was just thinking about that when studying European literature generally, it's not that easy to avoid the term of realism altogether. But in Latin context, probably it's even more relevant that you have this move, which we'll be dealing with in this paper also, from idealism more or less directly to modernism in whatever early forms perhaps it initially takes place. And this perspective provided by Moritz seems to be relevant to the discussion of the turn of the 20th century Latvian literature, which was paving its way from folkloristic traditions towards representation of the conditions of modern society, from literature dealing with patriotic sentiments towards texts which incorporate individual experience and up-to-date aesthetic visions. Now we move to the second part of my talk, which will involve brief case studies. And we will now juxtapose early models of time representation with modernist ones. We'll utilize two pairs of texts where in each case the publication of the early literary work consciously coincides with the third Latvian Song Festival in 1888, which is a folkloristic event important at that time and still an event of major social importance in today's Latvia. If you come to Latvia, also to Estonia, Lithuania, every 3 or 4 years, you can still experience this very important song festival. And the letter text in each case is published 1905, the year which was also marked by major social changes, social uprising in Russian Empire. So it was already, these texts already point toward different temporality. We'll first discuss differences in depiction of reality as demonstrated by Adolf Kalnacs' 1888 play, Kas ir tādi, kas dziedāja, who were they who sang, with a lot of folkloristic material still there. And Rudolf Blaumanis' drama Uguni from 1905 respectively. And then move on to discuss Andrejs Pumpur's national epic poem Large Places, called Bear Slayer, published 1888. And Rainis' drama Uguns un Nakts, Fire and Night from 1905, both dealing with a legendary folklore figure, appreciated as a Latvian national hero, but demonstrating substantially different level of complexity and involvement with literary issues relevant on a wider scale. So we might argue that in both cases, the letter text is doing some kind of recycling the earlier one. So let us begin with the first pair of these opposites. Adolf Kalnacs, the so-called father of Latvian theatre, who initiated the creation of the first Latvian theatre company in 1870, and here you see his picture on the left along other theatre directors in this 19th century fashion, locates the events of his 1888 play in a Latvian peasant's manor, which is inhabited by idealized peasants. Among them, the main character of the play, Latvian girl Skaidrīte and her loving father Baltāns. And on your right you see the actress who played the title role in this production and actually adapted her stage name from this production and from this character of Skaidrīte. The idyllic relationships are, however, disturbed as Skaidrīte falls in love with the local landlord, Konrad, who returns to his manor after a long stay abroad. And even if they are both fond of each other, the prejudices of peasants, as well as the protests from the aristocratic family of the landlord, force a sacrificial suicide of the young girl. Upon her death, however, the landlord swears his unbroken will to care about the future of the peasants. A sadly optimistic finale to a fairy tale story. Deep fears regarding changes, or for that matter, dangerous misalliances that might disturb the societal order, underline the reality of the world, kept aloof from any moves which do not coincide with older traditions, thus marking a timeless society which tries to preserve the traditional ways of life. Quite on the contrary, it is in the literary work of Rudolf Blaumanis. And now we move to his play In the Fire. Actually, the medium is the same. It's still a 5-act drama, a long piece of literary text. But Blaumanis is a different matter because he is one of the most important Latvian authors of the time period, and actually has been voted one of the most important Latvians of 20th century. So in this particular play, In the Fire, we face a completely different level of the awareness of changing time, which becomes substantial for the characters of this time. The concreteness of space, which is a minutely observed German landlord's manner, and time, the events are explicitly marked by the author as taking place before uprising, provides principal coordinates among which the characters are placed. In a sense, you have the same characters of landlord and of a Latvian girl juxtaposed, but they do not form the main storyline here. The ruling landlord is juxtaposed to his subaltern servants, and this contrast is played out both in their mutual relationships as well as in the plot line of the drama dealing with the love story of Maid Christina and Will Engers, which acquires an additional importance in the context of Chosen Macaulay. Here, a lot of pictures left down, you see both of them. The climax is provided by the ending of the third act, which leads to a sudden emotional outburst, which explodes in opening up the sensuality of Christine's relationship with Edgar. The setting of this act is that of the landlord's studio, as the landlord has departed to the city. And initially, she tries to avoid him coming to have a conversation or something of the kind. And in the process of trying to escape, she runs through the backstage doors, covered by a curtain. As the curtain is turned off, a majestic hall with mirrors in the sunset suddenly opens to the gaze of protagonists, as well as spectators. The long suppressed outburst of feelings takes place in the very rooms from which sensuality has been expelled both figuratively, as the centuries-long codex of aristocratic behavior and the explicitly rational foundations of marriage, and literally as confirmed by the bachelor status of the landlord in the play. We can also trace the importance of the build-up to this crucial scene. For a long time in the play, Christine remains restrained, as Edgars is not generally considered to match expectations to be a reliable husband. And she is also an object of interest of a well-to-do Latvian farmer upmarriage. The way she holds her passion within bounds is well in the tradition of sentimental literature's chaste heroines, and also marked by the strictness of the Baltic German milieu, as well as imposed by the advice and experience of her own mother. However, by the end of the third act, the fire of Christina's and Edgar's passion is impossible to smother any further, mimicking the possible but underdeveloped delights of the ruling class. In a deeply emotional and sensual outburst, the two subalterns experience the pleasure of their encounter in the glorious surroundings of the manor hall, appropriating it in the same, and still not quite the same, way as their master. This situation forms the background for Christina's final decision in the fifth act. It is the scene with which we began our insight into early 20th century Latvian literature. The rising sensibility of an individual in this finely nuanced drama matches that of the rising self-awareness of an emerging nation. According to Homi Bhabha, national narrative can acquire either pedagogic, as represented by the well-to-do advantage, or performative characteristic, and this latter approach, embedded in the masterful analysis of Christina's personality, closely coincides with modernist emphasis upon irrationality and the subconscious. Toriel Moy writes that, I quote, Ibsen's double perspective, his awareness of the impossibility of either choosing or not choosing between theatricality and authenticity, stands at the center of Ibsen's modernism, unquote. And even if I haven't put that much attention on aspects of theatricality in this particular play, they are there, and they are crucial for both of the discussed scenes. Now to the second pair of opposites, where basically we encounter a similar juxtaposition, even if the scale of conflicts is wider and in the latter work has even broader philosophical implications. National epic poem, Large Places, published 1888, much later if compared to Finnish examples or Estonian examples. Still forming one of the foundational texts of the Latvian nation. It is an epic poem based on folklore materials, but created by an individual author, in this case, a national romantic poet. And the text itself involves memories of the timeless, happy childhood of the nation, which has been interrupted by foreign invasion and settlement. And the narrative implies that the time has come to recover the lost values. The poem expresses a hope that the hero will rise again to help the nation to regain its lost freedom and to link its past and future in an organic whole, a notion characteristic for the understanding of nation in the 19th century thought. The text also alludes to the 19th century belief that an epic is the crucial proof of the historical self-dependence of a nation. To be without an epic for the 19th century nations means to exist without history, as many researchers have pointed out. And what you see in these pictures, it is the way how in the 20th century Pompous heroes are institutionalized by the official imagery of the state. Starting from the national monument, it's figures from the Monument of Freedom in Riga, which is one of the central monuments there. With postcards, with state banners, and so on. The same plot is utilized again in a completely different fashion less than 2 decades later, in 1905, when it becomes the basis for the Latin modernist poets and playwrights Rheims' symbolism, triumph, fire and night, making a breakthrough in the representation of the rising Latin nation. And this impact was strengthened by the play's hugely popular first stage production in 1912. I am not going very much into details discussing this particular work of art. Perhaps it's enough to say that instead of accentuating the plot line which mostly follows the story already provided by Pompous, Rheims' focus is upon different stages of historical transformation of Latvian society, where each act of the drama marks a crucial step along this way, thus also fragmenting the narrative into collage of episodes taking place at different times and locations. Importantly, the patriotic task of the hero is matched by his desire for personal experience, and the clash between these two drives is marked by deep inner conflict. Alongside political and social issues, Rheims' play thus also provides an implicit discussion of the role of art in the shaping of human personality. And one of the characters of the drama, Speedo, top right in this slide, constantly promotes striving towards the realm of absolute beauty, the imagery clearly pointing towards individual self-fulfillment, traditionally appreciated by modernist literary and art criticism. So in the pictures actually you see how the stage representation of this particular work of art has developed up to a modern version of contemporary rock opera based on this story. The image of Speedo is probably one of the most important symbolist images in Latin literature. My aim in this paper, however, is to argue for the possibility of wider application of the notion of modernist literature, not only these formal aspects may be important for core European literatures more than for Latin, with different temporalities providing diverse starting points for aesthetic radicalization. Fully self-conscious modernist attempts, therefore, may also keep the link between culture and society intact. In such perspective, the individualism of Christina in Glaumanis' play carries the same modernist message, for me at least, as that provided by Rheims' symbolist here in Speedo, the individualism of the latter being confronted with the patriotic drive of the national hero at Large Places. Some brief conclusions. We have paid attention to the radical shift in the understanding of the world experienced by the Latvian society during the turn of the century period and its representation in literary text. Within one or two generations of authors, it is possible to detect a substantial move away from traditional models of generalized time towards more personal and subjective visions. This process is closely linked to the quickly rising self-consciousness of the Latvian society and self-positioning of the young Latvian intellectuals alongside traditionally dominant German and Russian social circles. Latvian literature during this time period ceases to be a product of a didactic intention and moralizing value, and makes a crucial step in recognizing its rights to submerge into primarily aesthetic issues. In this process, a three-step development of the Latvian literature at the turn of the 20th century might be observed. First, in those early texts, especially this of Salman's play, the influence of popular literature, adventure stories and romances, which still dominate Latvian literature in the latter part of the 19th century, and probably represent, in Mikhail Bakhtin's terms, a naive chronotype, where the same adventures can take place in different social milieus and historical periods without significant alteration. Time and space are not that important for this representation. Second, the gradual rise of realist texts which serve the portrayal of contemporary social conditions and where the events unfold within specific social and historical circumstances. And third, the probably modernist shift underlying the inattention of individual experience within broader societal structures. And for me, as was also suggested by involving Toril Moy's ideas, B and C idea of realist texts and probably modernist shift, they somehow come together in this period of time. The works of the fin de siècle generation of Latin writers are typical examples where different languages of heteroglossia are brought into dialogic interaction. The previously dominant patriarchal models characterized by timeless order and at the same instant scrupulous observation of daily and hourly duties, reminding of an internal rhythm of country life, are challenged by the multiplicity of lived experience during changing times. The representation of objective and linear time is matched by the discontinuity of personal and often troubled individual lives. The early 20th century modernist efforts reveal deep contradictions in the growingly self-confident, while economically and socially still underdeveloped Latvian society. Thank you.